This is actually an area that I have to say is probably one of the more challenging issues that I've had to deal with for some time. We'll go through some details in terms of what the industry is currently doing in this space, but certainly those who are involved in both the production area as a grower or providing advice to growers in terms of pesticide application probably recognise that we're in a changing environment at the moment, and that's going to create some challenges for us, I think, in the next few years. I just slipped this slide in, and thanks for putting this in at the last moment, but I thought it's worth looking at what some of the external drivers are. And if you look at our farming systems currently, weed management is a key part of what is actually driving our productivity and our efficiency in our farming systems. And there's a range of factors or external factors that actually drive that. Where's the laser pointer on this one?
Green button.
The green button, aha, right in the middle there. We will, after morning tea, hear a lot more from Chris Preston and Steve Powers about herbicide resistance, and that's certainly creating some significant challenges to us. It's something that we're keeping a watching brief on, and certainly a lot of research and development and tools that we're looking at in that space of how to reduce the impact of herbicide resistance risk. If you look at our herbicide weed control, that's really been an important part of our farming system, particularly with the no-till production and reduced tillage. And if you look at some of the drivers that ultimately affect our herbicide supply risk, some of which include also the development of new actives, which is significantly starting to decline in terms of new actives coming to the market. We are actually seeing opportunity for new chemistry, but it's principally analogues of existing chemistry or products that have essentially been taken from the cupboards of companies from some time ago. But this area I want to talk to you about today, about pesticide use regulation, is one of those drivers that will ultimately affect our farming system and how we actually farm. And from the GRDC's point of view, this is something we're looking at quite closely in a strategic sense. In March last year, the APVMA issued an operational notice, and we were actually given a heads up in this the previous October in 2009 by the APVMA in that this might be coming. But in trying to finalise the spray drift review, they basically laid down their new guidelines they're going to implement in terms of spray drift risk management. And this operational notice has a lot of implications to the industry, and we'll talk about this a bit more detail shortly. But from the GRDC's point of view, we realised that there was some need to make some progress in some space, and so the GRDC actually has made some investment in development of an interim drift reduction model. I'll talk about this in more detail. The Centre for Pesticide Application Safety in Queensland has been a key part of the delivery of this model, and I suppose from the industry perspective there's a need to go back and have some industry consultation. So we actually put some resources in place to go to all the industry stakeholders and talk about how we might approach spray drift management and the need for further models to help the industry understand how we can better use drift reduction technologies. What I'm going to talk to you now, I'm going to change hats slightly. I'm actually taking off my GRDC hat and actually now speaking on behalf of the National Working Party on Pesticide Applications. And this is a working party that is currently in an interim role. They have an interim executive committee, and Nicholas Woods from Plant Health Australia has been instrumental in providing this group with executive support. So this presentation, you see, we're actually presenting across Australia. Various members of the working party are presenting that in Adelaide and Perth and Ballarat and other places. But what I'm going to do is detail to you really the background of what this working party is working towards. The APVMA, as I said before, implemented their new pesticide guidelines on spray drift. And they've indicated that new product label instructions will describe mandatory no spray buffer zones. That's going to potentially create some challenges for the agriculture industries. Not forgetting it's not just agriculture, there's other industries in this space, viticulture, horticulture as well, are impacted by the same regulations. And the labels of a range of currently registered pesticides have been reviewed in regards to how we might, or from the APVMA's point of view, how they might be further regulated. Now, if you look specifically at phenoxy herbicides, your 2,4-Ds, MCPAs, etc., that's been the first component or first group of herbicides in that list. They currently have a priority list of 45 products, predominantly herbicides. There's some insecticides and one fungicide, one triazole fungicide in that list that they propose to review in this space over the next 12 to 18 months. So the APVMA has recently introduced its operating principles in relation to spray drift risk, and it goes into more detail on droplet size, weather conditions, no spray zones, and also record keeping requirements. And I have to say these changes are pretty significant, and for those of you who aren't familiar with these, I encourage you to actually go to the APVMA website and have a look at them. Certainly from an advisory point of view with growers, it will have some impacts. If you look at previous standards, like this is an Amostar label, and if you look in general terms, it says do not spray when conditions favour drift beyond the area intended for application. It was a fairly generic, fairly almost benign comment, but the consequences in a legal sense are still quite real to whoever applies that. But you would say that there wasn't a lot of specificity about, I need a glass of water, about those recommendations. Now, if we go to a product that's recently been relabelled and actually has been considered under these no spray zone statements, this is Movento, which is primarily going to be used in the horde industries in the first sense. But you can see that there's some quite specific guidelines in terms of buffer zones, in terms of downwind no spray areas. And you know, for this particular product, depending on the wind speed, that could be anything up to 160 metres. And so this is now in the label. So as new products come through the system and are actually reviewed, that's going to create some challenges. So one of the things the APVMA have looked at is the use of drift reduction technology permits, and they've actually got a page now on their website that details how that area is actually operating. And essentially the permit system they're proposing is that there'll be a series of credits, if you like, based on the type of drift reduction technology you might actually use, whether it be air induction nozzles, shrouds, adjuvants, these sorts of things. And these will be potentially supplementary to the actual label itself and enable growers and advisors to basically provide additional advice to reduce those impacts. Now, that's what the APVMA have actually proposed, is the changes in this regulatory space. From a industry perspective, the implications for those changes are going to be reasonably swift, we believe at this point in time. Although the APVMA had indicated that they would actually finalise their spray drift review, particularly in regards to phenoxy herbicide use. That hasn't taken place yet, and they actually are currently considering additional data that's been submitted to them. So a lot of what the APVMA have in this space is still currently in proposal, and some of it hasn't been finalised, but it is important to recognise that that's the pathway that they're taking at this point. So as a consequence of these changes, a motion was moved at this meeting in October and further meetings in March last year to form a National Working Party on Pesticide Application. And it's really to provide a forum to assist growers to understand and implement these changes. And at that initial meeting, we had a number of stakeholders from multiple industries: grains, cotton, horticulture, viticulture, and training stakeholders, growers and other participants in the industry. And we discussed how we might approach this. So this National Working Party was formed as an interim executive committee to basically try and work with the APVMA to perhaps provide a more realistic and practical risk management scenario for industry. So the members currently include representatives from grains, and I sit on that on behalf of the grains industries: cotton, horticulture, crop life, pesticide resistance, and national and state farming organisations. Some commodity-specific industry organisations also represented there. And Out of the meetings, an interim executive committee has been formed. That's chaired by Gavin Katnar, and it's got representatives from, you can see a range of different companies, plus crop life and other industries from cotton and horticulture. And currently, what the task of this working paper is to scope what research is actually required to respond to the APVMA spray drift guideline changes. I have to say this is a really complex issue, and you'll get a bit of a feel for why this is in a moment. We are engaging heavily with the APVMA on this, with regular meetings, and Gavin Katnar, who's chairing that process, comes from a background within DAF, and Nicholas Woods, who's providing executive support to that group, actually comes from an aerodynamics spray drift modelling background himself, so actually from a technical standpoint has a very good understanding of these issues. Some of the outcomes of the work to date have been delivered through Andrew Hewitt, who's with CPAS at the University of Queensland, and we've actually already submitted a interim drift model for air induction nozzles already to the APVMA, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Now, just to give you a bit of background in terms of the models that the APVMA have used to generate, and this, when I talk models, you know, this isn't the type of model I had in mind, but anyway, it's just one of those things. Spray drift models are quite complex and probably quite boring to look at, but they're quite powerful. And there's principally two main models the APVMA have used in terms of regulatory evaluation of a whole range of pesticides to date. One is AgDRIFT, which has its origins actually through the US Air Force, actually coming out of the Cold War and Vietnam, and a lot of it was associated around biological and chemical warfare deployment, so it's actually quite a scary background in that respect. But out of that it was developed further, had a significant integration with the US Forestry Service, and they've come up with quite a powerful aerodynamic model, particularly for aircraft-based applications with AgDRIFT. What was taken further is the Spray Drift Task Force in the US, which is made up of CropLife members in CropLife America, and they put a consortium together and actually developed a much more sophisticated model called AgDRIFT, which also has a ground-based model as well as aircraft-based models. It was quite an expensive exercise, about $28 million US about 15 years ago to develop this to the current point that we have. Today's estimates are somewhere between 50 and 60 million to redo that work. Out of the AgDRIFT model, the basis of which the APVMA have actually developed their regulatory requirements for labels here in Australia is based around what they call the Tier 1 ground model. And these are the only inputs you have in this model. So you can see there's very limited impact of boom height, fairly limited scope for spray quality, and in terms of environmental considerations, very limited ability to model that. Compared to the aircraft model, which is quite sophisticated, which has everything from wind direction, humidity, a whole range of factors, even down to looking at adjuvant spray quality, the type of chemical and products actually used. This is actually quite a basic model, and that's one of the challenges we have, is that the current data the APVMA has in terms of regulating the space is quite limited. And what's quite evident is we need to develop more scientific data to really, I suppose, have a model that's actually applicable to current practices that the industry is actually using. And if you look at the sort of curves that it indicates, you can see here that based on the fines produced by current field rates, and this is at the 9th percentile for ground booms, you can see that the models are actually pushing right out here to 300 metres in terms of drift. Now, in actual fact, it would be nice if the models are actually extrapolated further, but they're not, and actually highlights the limitation of this. But what is actually happening now is that recently Tom Wolfe, who some of you may be familiar with, spoken at previous conferences, he's with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. He has actually recently done some work. We've actually invested in some of that as well to reanalyse some of the existing AgDRIFT data, use some of the Canadian data that's actually been made publicly available through publication, And we've actually, through that process, developed a new analysis and a new set of curves. And so this is a suite of curves now that we have for not just the fine to medium nozzles, but we now have models right through to the extra coarse spray qualities. And that's been a really important thing for the industry to have. So the APVMA are currently considering this data that's been submitted to them. We actually haven't yet received a formal response. But what it means is that the industry can potentially be given credit for the use of air induction type technology nozzles, which do reduce spray drift. And the reductions in drift through the use of those nozzles certainly reduce the current estimates by at least to a third of that's currently proposed by the APVMA. So that's under consideration at the moment, and I think is a major step forward, but it's still pretty limited. We have no ability to look at climatic conditions, adjuvants, other additional drift reduction technologies, and we need to look at a more sophisticated approach. To look at improved modelling, this is quite a complex area. So what we did is the GRDC engaged Plant Health Australia, and specifically Nicholas Woods, to help the Working Party Committee work through how we could actually approach the development of new models and how we might be able to accommodate and recognise the appropriate use of DRTs by users. I'll just skip over this, but PHA is consulting widely with a range of stakeholders, and you can see from that list there it's quite extensive. It's not just here in Australia but internationally as well, because a lot of the data in this space resides in the international forum. And currently what's happening, we have currently a draft response plan about how we're going to approach this, and that's going out for consultation. That's just starting this week. A range of industries are being consulted directly in this space, including the grains industry. And we're actually, following this period of consultation, will take about 6 weeks. We are proposing to have a meeting in Canberra on about the week of the 18th of April to have wider stakeholder, be an open meeting for stakeholder engagement in terms of discussions of how the industry will respond as a whole to the proposal. And there'll be a plan put forward to go forward and address some of the issues in this space. There is a need to look at research resources not only in Australia but internationally. Australia is very fortunate. We have one of the only 2 operational wind tunnel facilities in the world that can actually put chemical actives through it for spray drift modelling. There is a third one that's currently not operational in the US, could be reactivated, but that is a major resource here for Australia, and it's probably quite important that we continue to have access to this. We sort of map out where we might go with this modelling work. We're going to take the existing AgDRIFT and AgDRIFT models. We've already done the new analysis work. The 4As actually have an aerial droplet calculator, which has been considered as a bit of a model for how we might approach development of an active tool for growers. And we are currently looking at opportunities in international investment for a new Canadian empirical model to actually help the industry look at how we might approach a more sophisticated, what we describe as active drift reduction model. So we're currently exploring as a working party how we'd actually engage with that international investment. Now, if I can just sort of flip sideways here, there's actually a lot of work going on in New Zealand in the horticulture industry, and I have to say it's really complex because you can't move trees easily. The proximity of a lot of those industries to housing is actually quite difficult. It's the same for the viticulture industry. Where we want to try and head is develop a fully predictive ground model. So basically say, I want a buffer zone to say, 20 metres, how do I achieve that? Based on weather conditions. What DRTs, what technology do I need to use to approach that? And what we're currently doing is considering investments in specific projects to support this process as an international consortium. And so you've got several different countries, many different organisations now having to work together to come to a common point of where we want a fully predictive ground model, which is really where we want to head in the longer term. So the outcomes we're hoping to achieve from this is development of information tools that can be used to quickly consider the appropriate use of DRT nozzles and other DRTs, adjuvants, shrouds, these sorts of things. And essentially we want to develop a new suite of curves that the APVMA can use for regulatory purposes And not only that, it's linked that with international work, because obviously the APVMA, if they're actually assessing something that's developed from an international consortium, it provides confidence and rigour in that whole process. What is really clear from the whole process here is that we actually have to come up with a transparent science-based understanding of risk assessment for spray drift. We can't just base decision or force the APVMA to make decisions based around hearsay or grower experience. We actually have to produce empirical data and stuff that would stand up to scientific scrutiny. And what is really clear is there is a need for a national training accreditation system that supports the uptake and adoption of those drift reduction technologies, and that's a point of major discussion with the Working Party. So we hopefully, out of that, will see the eventual deployment of an acceptance of an international, fully coordinated predictive model for ground-based application for all pesticides. And stewardship is part of that. There's also a need to look at actually the type of equipment that's used within that space, and so the equipment manufacturers are also being engaged through this discussion. And obviously quite a considerable amount of ongoing communication and liaison with the APVMA. So next steps. The draft response by the National Working Party Pesticide Application is going out for comment. That's been managed by Gavin Katnar and Nicholas Wood. So if you have any questions around that, I encourage you to approach them directly, but I can provide you with their contact details. And one of the more complex parts of getting negotiation agreement with the stakeholders, how we're going to co-invest to do all this work. The APVMA, I suppose in summary, is clearly saying that they are going to implement new policies in this space. There will be new label instructions, and we basically need to provide, as an industry, options for tools for use of DRTs under the permit system. I suppose one of the challenges at the moment is that we have actually submitted some data already to the APVMA in this space. That's still yet to receive scientific reviews within that organisation, and we're still yet to see a response from that. But that doesn't mean that we're not in the place of actually submitting additional data. So we're actually continuing to submit more data, particularly in the use of shroud technology at this current point in time. And hopefully in the not too distant future, before the middle of the year, we'll get the additional work underway. So just in summary, the aims of what the GRDC sees that we want to see out of this whole process is through the engagement with the National Working Party. We do need to see a collaborative approach to this. We do want to see a new ground-based DRT model, and ideally we'd like to see a field evaluation system which helps applicators, growers, to determine the best droplet size, specific tank mix combinations of DRTs to give the most cost-effective application. We will be taking some proposals that have been submitted to us further, and that's up for consideration as part of this process through the National Working Party. And one of the key parts of that is we do want to develop an economic model to determine the least cost alternative to DRTs, because we don't want to take industry down a, one better word, an expensive pathway unnecessarily. If we can provide more cost-effective options through this process, that'll be quite useful. And obviously a clearly identified economic proposition for grain sensory implementation of DRTs. Just the final slide is that the GRDC is making some additional investment. All up, we're putting, at this point in time, nearly $1 million, or just on $1 million into the work. This investment, the GRDC is considering, is conditional upon co-investment from the registrants. But one very important reason is that we don't want the industry to go and develop a model that is not relevant or of use to the manufacturers and chemical manufacturing companies. Through co-investment engagement with the companies, we'll end up with a model that everyone agrees that will be used and utilised by the industry. And one of the challenges, I suppose, is timely assessment by the APVMA of this work. So that's it in terms of what is actually going on in this space, but I have to say it is in some ways quite challenging, and I think that we have a process in place where we're going to come up with a very robust approach to this. One of the challenges is the time it's going to take, not only to pull the consortium together, but also to deliver the research outcomes from this work. But I'll open up to questions if you like, Chris.
Thank you. Rohan, I might just comment, obviously it's a challenging area, and certainly from what you've said, there's a lot of work that needs to still occur with it. So what sort of time frame can we expect, at your best guess, will come down to the industry from an advisory point of view to become aware of this particular issue of drift?
Well, I hope in the first instance that the APVMA will take into consideration the initial suite of curves we've put in place, because currently, in terms of what is actually up on their website, that's not in consideration. So, for example, potentially if you're going to use a phenoxy herbicide like 2,4-D, you're looking at a 300 metre buffer zone based on the current considerations. The data that's been submitted will potentially significantly reduce the requirement for that buffer zone. So our hope is that you'll see some fairly immediate, I suppose, impacts in terms of advisors, in terms of what they can advise their growers to do. We're still yet, obviously, to wait and see what the outcome of that process is. So one of the other considerations too is that we invest in Pesticide Application as an organisation through a whole range of research providers. A lot of discussion about the type of nozzle technology we need to use for future aspects of that work. So, for example, it's unlikely we're going to want anybody to go and continue doing spray trials with flat fan nozzles, for example. We're going to want them to have the capacity to run all their spray equipment using your induction nozzles. So, having high pressure sprayers is a need there as well. So, it's impacting sort of in a broader sense as well.
In relation to the changes that are coming in, or even the current statements we have, there seems to be a lack of enforcement of the rules we currently have. If we're going to spend a lot of money on getting better guidelines on labels, is one of the government agencies, federally or state-wise, going to match that with improved enforcement or checking or compliance with it? So it's one thing to spend a lot of money on changing the rules and researching and having guidelines, but if they're not being followed and not being enforced, what meaning will they have to the industry?
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Bill. One of the issues the APVMA, I think, is concerned about is that as an industry, even if we go and, like the lead growers and the advisors in Australia are already using current best practice in terms of drift reduction technology nozzles. The challenge is, though, that we probably can't demonstrate that. So that provides, I suppose, an opportunity for the industry to look at actually how we might be able to show that good stewardship is actually being practiced by the industry. And there's a need, I think, to consider that, and that's a major point of discussion within the working party, this whole area of stewardship. The issue you raised about use, it's interesting, APVMA basically regulate to the point of sale, and then the regulation around use is actually then regulated by the states, and depending which state we're in, it's either by, it could be the Agriculture Department, it might be Environment in some states, and some states actually the Department of Health, so it's actually quite variable nationwide who actually regulates that area. But there is a lot of discussion that's been going on for a number of years about harmonisation of use for pesticide use in Australia. That's still, the heads of government in each state are still talking in that space. Whether we'll see traction there, but it would appear to make it a lot easier if we actually had uniform use legislation in Australia. I think that would make it a lot easier from a regulatory sense and make it easier for the manufacturers too in applying those rules nationally. So we do have some challenges there. The enforcement, I don't know, but a good question to ask is this area of demonstrating stewardship. And I think as an industry, there's an opportunity for some significant discussion in that space.